Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar on the A to Z of secure manual payments. My name is Sarah Bellaby. I'm the Solutions Consultant here at ICO. I've been with ICO around about 13, 14 months, although I'm also a qualified accountant. I've been a qualified accountant since 2010, I believe. Today, I have one of my great colleagues, Shiv, with me. Shiv, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. Morning, good afternoon all. I'm Shivam, Head of Delivery here at ICO. Also ACCA qualified, so a full-time accountant in my past life. And I've been at ICO for about 18 months as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so just in terms of today's webinar, just a reminder that we do have an ebook available to accompany this webinar. The link to the ebook is available in the chat section on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a few house rules before we start. So everybody will be muted throughout today's presentation. However, there is the opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentation if you'd just like to type them into the questions chat box on the right hand side of the screen, and we will save some time at the end to answer those questions for you. We do also have a couple of polls. They are available to answer throughout, although we'll also remind you as we go through the presentation. Okay, so in today's agenda, we will be discussing what manual payments are and why they can pose a significant risk to your organisation. We will then discuss some of the use cases that our customers have and why they have chosen to manage this process with ICO. Next, we'll take you through a workflow of manual payments in our solution and discuss how ICO has been developed to manage inherent risks associated with the process. And finally, we'll provide a live demonstration of the manual payments process in ICO. As I've mentioned before, in between we'll have a couple of polls just to make the webinar a little bit more interactive, although you can answer these at any time. And as I've mentioned, there'll be time for Q&A at the end, so please do type in your questions into the chat. Okay, so what are manual payments? So these tend to be those one-off or irregular payments to either private individuals, or they can be vendors which are not currently set up within your ERP system. And because of this, the process tends to be manual in nature, which means you can have various different templates and workflows in place within your organization for creating and managing these types of payments with varying degrees of approval. So it can be very unstructured in nature. Some of the biggest risks associated with manual payments process result from small amounts being processed, therefore they tend to require less approvals, a lack of automation of the process, therefore resulting in the risk of data manipulation, and unstandardized workflows, as we mentioned, which means supporting evidence can either be missed or added at a later date, which goes against audit best practice. Shiv, do you have some experience in your current working history?
Yeah, indeed I do. I think what we're going to do is jump into some actual ICO use case customer use cases. But before I do, I just want to give you a little bit of my personal experience of using manual payments from my career when I first started. So when I first started my career at EY, one of the big four, I was working in liquidations and strategic exit routes. So I was working on numerous liquidations and administrations of entities around the globe. Now, the liquidators or administrators of an entity are required by law to advertise notification of a liquidation or administration in the Gazette. It's quite an infrequent event, as you can imagine. Not many companies go into liquidation or administration on a day-to-day basis. So from that perspective, it was very much a one-off payment that needs to be processed to the Gazette themselves. Now, I do recall from early on in my career that it used to be a very manual process with kind of 3 levels of checks in place. And as you mentioned, you know, there were risks involved. So the kind of 3 levels or the 3 processes we had in place to make manual payments was one, we would firstly contact the Gazette to get a quote for the advertisement. And, you know, as a part of the quote, we would get them to reconfirm their bank account details just as a sense check. All of this information would be sent to me via email. So that would be called our master data, as you would call it. And the quote could vary, depending on the posting we wanted to make. So the amount would vary. And of course, where we were posting would also influence which bank account we were sending the actual money to. So we would always get them to reconfirm their bank details via email, and we would always get them to put the quote in the email as well. So therefore, we've got some kind of hard documentation in place. The second step in the process was, once we had a quote and the bank details had been sent over, we were then required to fill in a manual payment form, which was in the form of Excel, which, as you know, accountants absolutely love.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it would just be, repeating the information on this payment form. So, for example, we would include the PAYE details, the reason for payment, the bank account details, and of course, attached to this payment form would be all of our hard documentation. So the email from the Gazette, any correspondence regarding the liquidation or the administration as well. Now, the last step in this process was sign off. And this was probably back in 2014, 2015. So it was very much a manual process of getting sign off. And as I was the bottom of the food chain at that stage, I would have to go and get line manager approval. And then we would subsequently obtain partner sign off as well. And this would be, a physical signature on the bit of paper to say, I've checked the payment form, I've checked all the backup documentation, and we're happy to release this payment. So once all the documentation was checked and signed off, I would then pass that over to the Treasury Department, who would then manually make that payment and file that form in a good old filing cabinet, as we used to have back in the day. So as you can hear, or as you can tell from the process, there were definitely some breakdowns which posed a risk. There was a clear potential for errors and fraud, in the sense that the supporting evidence could be tampered with. Emails and manual filled forms does really give the responsibility to the person who is actually completing that form to be truthful and honest about the information on that form itself. There were also instances whereby sometimes the payment form would be raised by the line manager themselves. And because they were in such a senior position, it would not require any additional approval. So therefore, they would just submit that form or take that form to the Treasury team, who would then process that form. So there was no additional checks there. And finally, the payment itself was a manual job, meaning that the Treasury team would manually enter the information from the payment form into the payment system. So there's always a chance for kind of human error there as well. So there was no automation. There was nothing to say, automatically select this bank account to make a payment from. It was very much manual processes. There was a lot of scope for missing supporting evidence, as we can see on the slide as well. Lack of automation, meaning everything was a manual and very arduous process. So yeah, from my experience and my history, this is why I love the manual payments module so much. Because it does give you that kind of additional sense check. It does give you that additional reassurance that the information you are submitting is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that we've said fraud loopholes, but there is just the inherent risk of human error from transposing data through manually typing things in. So hopefully we'll see as we go through the presentation and in the demonstration how the ICO solution can help support and minimize those risks.
Exactly. And I think, my experience is one thing. And I think what we'll do is we'll jump into some manual payment use cases to see how our customers are actually utilizing the manual payments module as well. So firstly, this is a use case which should resonate with many of us. One of our customers, Autocompo, I say one of our customers, but all of our customers have to make tax payments. And they must make multiple tax payments to multiple tax authorities where they are in different jurisdictions. So as you know, a tax payment is generally made on an annual basis. However, due to the nature of business and ultimately tax rules, it's not always the case that a business would make the same payment year on year to a certain tax authority. Not only that, the payment amount can fluctuate as well. It could be 1 year that a business has made a loss, and therefore they carry that loss over to a subsequent year, and therefore reduces any future tax liabilities and influences the tax payment in future years. So in this case, we always say that a tax payment is a manual payment. There's no kind of structure or recurrences behind it. As there are no certainties with tax payments and we don't receive invoices for payments from tax authorities, what we say is a kind of generally a one-off payment. In that specific year, you're making the payment. And with a tax payment, it can't be predicted well in advance. You know, there may be year-end transactions which go through, which, you know, influence your tax calculations, or even post-year-end adjustments, which influence your tax calculations as well. So for these cases, many of our customers, such as OTK, they do utilize the payments module to make secure payments to tax authorities. The workflow, I think, Sarah, is something that you're going to go through later on in the presentation, so then everyone can understand, you know, the full end-to-end life cycle of a manual payment. However, in brief, the information relating to the tax payment, such as the amount, if you're in the UK, the corporation tax reference number, the period for the payment, all of that useful information is put into the manual payment form within ICO itself. Once all information relevant to the payment has been input into the manual payment form itself in ICO, the form then follows the company's internal governance. And this is where the customization of ICO really comes in. So, for example, where you have a payment to a tax authority and it's above or below a certain threshold, it may require 1 or 2 levels of approval. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to go too much in depth into the workflow itself. Sarah will kind of demonstrate the exact workflow and the customization or configuration that ICO can achieve. So once the workflow is complete, ICO will automatically create a pane file. This pane file is then imported by the bank using the payment gateway, and the payment is subsequently made. Once the payment has been made by the bank, many of our customers, such as OTK, who utilize our journals module, actually book that payment into the GL. So the process they go through, and again, Sarah will go through this in a bit more depth, is they retrieve the bank statement showing that the payment has been made. This is subsequently loaded into ICO. ICO would then recognize that the payment has been made, and using our journals module, a journal would be raised, which would then book this into OTK's ERP system. So for OTK, it has meant, you know, they have a full end-to-end life cycle and audit trail of the payment itself. And it has meant less touch points for their end users as well, meaning less risk imposed for human error. So that's one of our use cases which OTK utilize. If I flick onto the next slide, just another specific use case in relation to OTK. And I found this one, you know, quite interesting and unique, which is why I included it as part of our use cases. So I'm sure all of you are aware of what debt factoring is, but for those of you who need a slight recap, debt factoring involves a business selling their invoices to a third party at a discounted price to bypass kind of hefty waiting times, which are sometimes associated with customers paying their invoices. It's quite a popular method of payment with SMEs due to the ability to provide them with instant access to capital. And it also does speed up their process with cash collection. And it's something that is used by OTK. So in this instance, OTK is in the production industry. They obviously utilize debt factoring to improve their cash life cycle. Manual payments has allowed them to speed up and review the kind of payment process here. So before, where it was such a manual process where, for example, a customer would pay OTK, OTK would then have to fill in internal forms and then manually send that payment to the debt factoring company. With the introduction of the manual payments module, again, it has meant there are less touch points for OTK and the end users themselves. So with debt factoring, the incoming payment from the factoring company itself is guaranteed. However, the real variable with debt factoring is the rate at which customers are chased and subsequently pay their outstanding invoices. So as there's no guarantee of payment, nor an indication of when payment is made, OTK really utilize the manual payments module as payments back to the debt factoring company can be on an ad hoc basis. So for example, sometimes they can make 5 payments a month, sometimes they can make 10 payments a month, and sometimes it may be a case they don't make any payments at all. So therefore it is very ad hoc and on a one-time basis. With debt factoring, as OTK and any other business which use debt factoring is put into short-term debt, it is crucial that the debt is reduced as soon as the customer makes a payment. Otherwise, it could lead to bad debt. So this is, again, why OTK utilize our manual payments module. So with customized configuration, with activity logging and reduced touch points for OTK, it has made their manual payments process much easier to track, much easier to monitor. And in addition, as ICO has the ability to make bookings once the bank statement has been uploaded, it means much more efficiency in their debt factoring process as well. So not only have they seen increased productivity, but because they do have the activity logging, so we can see exactly who's approved the manual payment, what workflow it has gone through, it does make those kind of sense checks and that reassurance to make that payment much more stable. Now, the last use case I wanted to go through was one of the largest media companies in the Nordics, Bonnier. It's a Swedish company. And of course, as a media company, they are sometimes reliant on freelance suppliers, giving them content for their social media, for their websites, and any other platforms they utilize to share their news and forms of media with their huge customer base. Of course, working with freelancers is great. It gives business an outsider's perspective on matters and therefore a unique point of view. And as a business in this industry, using freelancers is very beneficial. One, you have no obligation, meaning you have the option to use someone's work. And similarly, you have the option to decline the use of someone's work. So in that case, using freelancers is quite flexible, particularly in times where there's not enough news to report. Using freelancers can be really beneficial to kind of bulk out what you are reporting. With the use of freelancers, as there is no kind of regularity of work, there's no exchanging of invoices, there's no guaranteed recurrences. This is a type of payment which in Bonnier's perspective would be regarded as a manual payment to the individual providing the content. So in this instance, for this particular use case, the freelance journalists were, as the name implies, they were all self-employed. Therefore, Bonnier utilized the manual payments module to make payments to these freelance journalists on an ad hoc basis. So as the journalists and the people providing the content were in varying locations, payments did have to be made from bank accounts which were in the correct currency. So in order to make this a seamless process for Bonnier, ICO actually automatically picked up the currency for the payment in the payment form itself, and automatically allocated a corresponding bank account to make that payment. So ensuring that the currencies and the bank accounts were matched up. So from Bonnier's perspective, this made the workflow for manual payments much easier. And for them themselves, it improved their processes as it reduced the number of touch points required for Treasury to make the payments. And again, it was all recorded on the manual payment form itself. So there was a clear audit trail from initiation to payment, who had interaction with that payment form, who approved that payment form, and exactly when that payment was made to the corresponding freelance journalist. So those are kind of 4 use cases, something from previously my career where we've used a very much manual process, and 3 use cases where customers have gone from using a manual process to utilizing ICO to make manual payments in their businesses. So what we have next is a little poll. So as Sarah mentioned, the polls are open throughout the whole course of the webinar themselves. But this specific one, so a poll available for everyone to answer. Approximately how many manual payments does your organization make a year? A, 0 to 5,000. B, 5,000 to 10,000. C, 10,000 to 20,000. And D, 20,000 plus. So you may just want to put a bit of thought into how many manual payments your company does make. And when you are ready to answer that poll, please do select the poll icon at the bottom, input your answer, and we'll be sharing the results at the end of the presentation. So I think we're going to switch back to Sarah, and Sarah's going to go into the manual payments workflows.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay. If we can move to the next slide. Perfect. Okay, so as Shiv mentioned, I'm going to take you through kind of the workflow of the manual payment solution, just the kind of the theoretical side of things, and then we're going to move into the live demonstration. So from this perspective, the process starts with the template. And within ICO, all of the templates are fully configurable, and they can be configured by your organization, as we've heard in some of the earlier use cases, to ensure all of the relevant data is collated at the start of the process, dependent on what the payment is for. The creator or the preparer of the template then enters all of the relevant header field details, including things like the payee's name, the bank details, what the payment is for, and for how much. And the creator can also complete the row data. As you remember from Shiv's earlier conversation, we can create the journal. And the row data will contain the GL accounts required for those resulting journal entries. So once the payment has been made, and we can add any additional supporting evidence as well within the template as part of that workflow. It's also possible for a business user within your organization to start the process. So now, because ICO supports unlimited user licenses by standard, we can have any user within the business that can start this process by completing only the payment details, but maybe leaving the GL data to the treasury team, for example, who would be part of the approval and review stage. So the second stage involves the validation and approvals. We support up to 3 levels of approval as standard, and the manual payment request can also be validated against the ERP system for those GL accounts data. So you can check that the data added into the rows is accurate. You've got all the correct account codes. If you've selected a particular accounting segment, and if it needs a relevant tax code, for example, all of those standard validation checks that you would typically have within your ERP system will be replicated within the ICO solution. And as I mentioned, ICO can support additional levels of validation for mandatory requirements, such as adding supporting evidence and attaching that to the document. As I've also mentioned, ICO supports up to 3 levels of approval as standard, and this can also vary, as Shiv mentioned, on things like the amount of the payment or the type of payment being made. And approvers can be defined based on a threshold or limit. So if you were creating a manual payment request and it was a low value one, then it could go to a certain kind of middle manager. But if it was over a certain threshold, then it might require 2 approvals, but they would be different approvers that had the authority to approve a manual payment of a higher value. And you can also have those approvers set up to be approvers based on the template and company code combination. And the creator simply can select the appropriate approver from a drop-down list available. Okay, so once all of the approvals have been completed, the process then becomes fully automated. And this is really about mitigating any risks of fraud or even manual error through data manipulation. So once all of approvals have been made, ICO will securely generate that payment initiation or PAIN file, as you've heard mentioned, containing the vital end-to-end ID. And this is required for matching against the bank statement following successful payment. So we've got a matching field that we can check from the manual payment request in ICO to the bank statement that the payment has actually been successfully processed. And at this point, the PAIN file cannot be edited in any way. And it's transferred to an agreed SFTP location where your payment gateway system can collect and transfer that to the bank. So once the payment application sends the file to the bank, and a status message is returned immediately to determine whether the payment file is accepted or rejected. And ICO can read this status message back from the payment application. So if the file is accepted, then the bank will make the payment. As most organizations will receive daily bank statements, ICO, as we've mentioned, ICO can read from an electronic bank statement to confirm that the payment has been made by looking for that unique end-to-end ID, which was generated as part of the payment request. And then the final stage is the automated posting of the journal into the ERP system. And this is something which can be missed or delayed as part of the process if it's created manually. So following confirmation the payment has been made via the bank statement, ICO will automatically create and post the associated GL journal and read back the document ID from the ERP system. So it's really about closing the loop. And this process takes literally just a matter of seconds. Once the completed journal entry has been finished, then it will be attached to the manual payment request, which is in the linked documents section of the template, and we'll see that in the live demonstration, which provides the full audit trail of the process. There is one additional stage that can be configured, and that is the archiving of the document and its attached supporting evidence. So ICO can be configured to archive documents provided specific criteria is met, such as the workflow status being completed, or it can be set up after a defined timescale. And users will still have the ability to view any of those archived documents within the system. It's just that they can't be modified or edited in any way. And as I've mentioned before, as ICO offers unlimited user licenses as standard, organizations are actually able to provide auditors, for example, internal or external auditors, with access to ICO to perform any audit checks on the data in view-only mode. Okay, if we could just move to the next slide. Shiv, I think you've still got control. Oh, hold on one second. I think we're having a few minor technical issues here. Let me just see if I can share my screen to the correct slide. Okay, let me just see if are we on the, yes, okay. So apologies for the delay there. It seems that we just briefly lost Shiv for a couple of moments. So we're just going to move on to the next poll. Again, as we've mentioned before, have a think about these, try and answer those as we go through the presentation, and we'll follow up with the answers to those polls at the end. So the next poll is that how do you currently manage the manual payments process in your organization? So A, is it typically a very manual process with the use of things like Excel templates and emails? B, do you have some sort of in-house tool outside of your ERP system? C, do you have maybe a manual payments third-party tool that you're currently utilizing? Or D, do you not know at this particular stage? So please feel free to answer those, and then we shall move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to move on to the ICO manual payments demonstration. So I'm just going to flick to my correct screen that I'm sharing. Okay, so now we're in the ICO platform. As you can see at the moment, I'm currently in a journals dashboard. So within the ICO solution, we can generate any number of dashboards to support any module or process. I have literally started to create a manual payments dashboard this morning, but it is slightly more basic. But any user or any administrator within the ICO platform can generate their own dashboard to be able to have live information, real-time information as to the status of their manual payments. And in addition to the dashboards, we also have a list-based view. So you can see here, my screen's going to freeze on me a little bit now. We're just going to move over to the manual payments list-based view. So as you can see here, I have a full list of all of the manual payments that are available to me. My system, I think my system has been a little bit slow. You have a manual payments list-based view, and you can configure these to show any header field so that you have full visibility of all of the manual payments currently being processed through the ICO system, where they are in terms of their workflow status, and just to kind of a cross-checking purposes. There's a couple of different ways that you can generate a manual payment within the system. The first is to open up a copy of the manual payment or an existing manual payment within the system and take a copy of it. And the other way is to go from the Actions tab and create a new document. And just briefly, I'm going to close another screen down because I just need to be able to, where are we? There we go. I just need to be able to see my notes here. So at the moment, we're currently on what we call a new document. So no information has been entered. It's a standard blank document. And as you'll notice, as I start to pre-populate some of the header fields, and the rest of the document is going to open up to me. So I'm first going to select the relevant company code. And once I select a company code, then the range of document templates that are available to me that are linked to this company code are then available within the drop-down list. So I'm going to select this IBAN payment request, which is the manual payments template. And you can see when I open this up, then a number of different options become available to me to start to populate this manual payment request. And as we've mentioned throughout the presentation, all of these header fields are configurable. So, you know, we have a kind of a standard best practice of that quite often that the types of header fields that you'll want to auto-populate or want to have available to you as part of this process. But we do have quite a lot of flexibility in adding additional payment fields, such as the type of payment being made, which can obviously therefore then drive things like who is available or who is allowed to authorize that payment, or how the workflow for that particular manual payment will be driven. So at the moment, this is saying that I have a single approval available. And as I've mentioned before, we can support up to 3 levels of approval as part of a manual payment request. And I've also got the payer's name. So this is my company code. And because it selected my company code, then I've got a range of bank accounts that are available to me. Now, this could be something that the preparer or the creator of the manual payment request can select, or this could be something that could be at the final stage and the relevant bank account could be selected by a member of your treasury team. And all of this information is held within the party register within the ICO system. So once I've selected that, I can add my payment receiver name. So this is the person, the individual, or the private company that I'm sending this payment to. So I'm going to add my name in here. And then I need to add in their IBAN details. So I'm just going to copy this information from another screen to save me having to remember all of these digits. So that's my IBAN number. And then for the bit code that is available, I'm going to populate that details as well. I'm just going to copy and paste that in. And as Shiv mentioned before, this could be something where this information is collated by a form from the payment receiver person. This could be sent via email or something. So we can do some kind of checks to make sure that those are accurate. We then need to start to think about these payment description as well. So we need to enter a description of this payment. So this could be kind of consultancy as well. We then enter a payment amount, and this can drive again the requirements of the payment, whether we need to enter in some additional information. It could require additional numbers of approvals as well. Now, the currency code is currently being driven by the bank, but we can select a different range of company codes that are available to me. And you can see here that the system is automatically pre-populated with the payment date. We do have 2 optional fields within here as well. We have this message to the beneficiary or a payment reference. Typically, you can only choose one or the other. And this is quite often what is seen. This is actually added to the paying file. And this is what the payment receiver will receive on their bank statement. So it could be kind of like payment for consultancy. Okay. So then, as we've mentioned before, we come down to the row data. So this is where I'm going to enter in some information in here. So these are going to be my GL codes. I need to add in the amount. It's being a little bit slow with me this morning. And I can add in some item text. And this is going to be populated into the journal data as well. So I can put something kind of consultancy in here. At this stage, it is actually still showing as a live a new document, sorry, in the system. So it's not actually saved anywhere at all. So at this stage, once I save the document, it becomes a live document within the ICO system. And as you'll see, the ICO solution will actually generate a document ID for it. So we've got this 18321 here available as well. I can then validate this document. And this is going to do a quick cross check to check if there's any validations. It's going to check against the account codes and make sure that they are available to me. And we also talked about these additional layers of validations that can be added on top of the standard validation rules that you have from your ERP system. So in this instance, I have a validation rule just to ensure that the creator of this manual payment is adding some supporting evidence in the attachment. So I can add an attachment in here, and this can be an attachment of any different file type. So I can add some supporting evidence. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be the email or a form that's been created as well. We can add a screenshot as well. So we can copy and paste something in. And we can also restrict who can view that attachment, because remember, we're dealing with manual payments, and the attachment could have somebody's bank details within there. So maybe we want to limit who can view the attachment as well, maybe to people within the Treasury Department as well. So at this stage, I'm going to add my supporting evidence. I'm just going to do a quick validation check again to ensure that validation has all succeeded, because the system will actually prevent any document within ICO, and this isn't just relevant to manual payments, it will actually prevent any document moving forward within the workflow until all validation checks have succeeded to ensure a right first time approach. So now I can see all my validations have succeeded. I can simply submit this for approval. And then I can submit this to the appropriate approver. Now at this stage, I'm just going to come out of full screen mode just so I can change who my approver is. And you can see at this stage, we've come back to the list-based view, and we can see that this document is currently waiting for an approval. Now at this stage, because this is a demonstration system, I'm simply going to change hat, so to speak. So at first I was the creator, and now I am logging in as the approver. As you can remember, I sent the approval to Clive Jeffries. So I'm now going to log in with my approver's hat on so we can see this continuation throughout the workflow. So it's just taking a few seconds to load up. So at this stage, there's a couple of different ways that I can view this manual payment in the workflow. I either have what we call this My Tasks tab. So this is a customized or personalized dashboard. So I could be an approver for manual payments. I could be an approver for journal entries, for account reconciliations, for example, and everything would be visible to this personalized dashboard. Or I could simply come to the manual payments tab instead. And when I come to the manual payments tab, this manual payment that I've just created will be at the top of the list. And I can see here that this is the one that I created, which is waiting for an approval. So if I come into this manual payment request, I can at this stage review all of the information that is available to me. I can check that the manual payment is okay. I can check the supporting evidence. And at this stage, if you remember, when I was creating this manual payment request, as the creator, I only added one line to the GL data. So this was this top line. But what actually happened is when I sent this forward for approval and I submitted this for approval, ICO has automatically generated the credit line. And this is something that we can configure in the background. So this credit line always goes to the correct GL account as well. So at this stage, if I had any issues, maybe with the supporting evidence, if I felt that this wasn't correct, or that maybe the creator of the payment request has added insufficient supporting evidence, then I could at any stage return this to the creator. However, at this stage, I feel that I'm happy and all of the data is correct, and I could simply approve this. Now at this stage, if you remember, this was only required a single approval. So whenever we approve this or simply enter some information and submit this through the workflow, it will automatically close this document down and take us back to the list-based view. So at this stage, I'm actually just going to log back in as myself so we can complete the workflow and see this moving through the system. Okay, so I just need to select the system that I want to log into as myself. And again, I'm just going to go back to the manual payments tab so we can complete this workflow. Okay, so now we're logged back in. I can come back to my manual payments tab. We can actually see that this document is now showing as fully completed. So if I open up this document, you're going to see a couple of changes that have happened. So firstly, we can see the workflow status has changed to completed. We can see within the attachment section, we have additional file or attachment, and this is this pane file that has been generated and attached securely. So there has been no manual involvement with that. I can't change or I can't edit this in any way. The payment has been processed. And you can also see that we have an additional document in the links document section. So this is this SAP journal that has been automatically generated following successful payment. So if we just go into the journal, we can see also that within the journal, we have the pane file. We can see that this has been successfully posted within the action log. We can see that this was triggered by an action of our manual payment request. We can see that this was transferred to the ERP system, and we have a couple of BAPIs that have run to post the journal and read back the general ledger number or the GL document number from our ERP system. In this case, this is SAP. So this has all been fully processed. The journal has been posted to the ERP system. And again, this has also been done in a timely fashion. So this is fully automated by the system. So you're not missing out on this stage in the workflow. So this is all that I wanted to show on the manual payments stage of the process. It looks like we might have Shiv back with us. Shiv, are you able to share the slides again, or do you want me to share the slides?
I will indeed share the slides, and apologies, the classic internet cutout. So re-share my screen. And
it's always better if it happens to someone else and not to me.
Exactly. And Sarah, where we were discussing kind of validations, I think one key thing to point out is, we can validate quite a lot with our configuration. So with some of our customers, for example, on the payments form where we've had them using a specific account, we can actually make other fields, for example, profit center, mandatory based on the account we're using at the row level. And then at the header level as well, based on what account we're paying to, based on the currency, for example, we can make either IBAN or SWIFT a mandatory field. So, the validations do vary throughout company to company. So it's something that we're quite good at in terms of customizing our payment forms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we've talked about with the use cases, everybody does things slightly different. And it's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on within ICO is the configurability of the solution as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so that really takes us to the end of our presentation. I'm just going to have a look at the moment to see if we can have a look at the polls and see if we can see the poll results. I'm not sure that I can see them at the moment, so I may have to check with our administrator to see if they can actually do this as well. But in the meantime, if we can go through some of our questions. So one of the questions that we do have at the moment is how can we utilize ICO for our auditors at year-end close if they want to audit a sample of our manual payments? Now, I know from my perspective, I think I mentioned this throughout the presentation, the fact that we have unlimited user licenses as standard, it means that you are simply able to provide audit access to your auditors in view-only mode. So they can simply come into the solution, view a selection of manual payments, check the supporting evidence is accurate and is relevant. They can check that all the necessary approvals have been made as well, and it's gone through the appropriate workflow as well. Anything else that you want to add there, Shiv?
Yeah, no, I think because ICO is so well linked up, coming from a background in finance, I used to have to go through, the year-end close with the auditors asking you for, where's this evidence, where's that evidence? Because everything is stored within ICO, and of course, your manual payment has a direct link to your journal. The real benefit here for the end users is you don't have the auditors coming to you and asking you where's the evidence, or where's the corresponding journal, or where's the backup evidence for this manual payment. Because it is stored in one system, it really does free up the time of the end users to do actual meaningful BAU finance work at year-end close.
Absolutely. And I think that another important point to note is when we were talking about that kind of final additional stage around the archival of the documents, it's not just the kind of the documents or the template or form you saw me create as part of that live demonstration. When we archive the document, we also archive all of those supporting evidence attachments as well. So no information is ever lost, and you can keep that indefinitely. We don't have any kind of limits as to how long that data can be stored and archived as well.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Sarah. So if I just take it back to my kind of career at EY, where we had to store everything for a mandatory period of 7 years, and because it was, paper hard copies, we did used to file that in filing cabinets for 7 years. And because ICO is so digital, everything is stored in the system itself. So there's no need for, paper copies of documentation, which is, really great and brings everyone to the 21st century.
Absolutely. Okay, so another question we have here is, can you generate pane files for all banking systems? Now, I know from having conversations as part of my role within pre-sales and solution consulting, that we have, obviously, as with our current customers, we've been able to generate pane files for a number of different banking systems. But Shiv, just in your experience from working on delivery and implementation, any input on that?
Yeah, I would say, as you know, every customer uses a different bank and a different banking provider. And therefore, although pane files are supposed to be consistent across banking systems, sometimes they're not. Sometimes, pane files require certain information, whereas other banks, don't require that certain information. So it's something that we can definitely do. And I think due to the customization and configurability of ICO, is something that our customers do, really love, the fact that we can generate pane files for a plethora of banking systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I recall from another conversation that we had not so long ago, it's also, unfortunately, every banking system, they tend to be quite kind of legacy, older systems. So, there is kind of a little bit of background work as part of any implementation project, just to understand what those banking systems will accept. So, an example of one banking system might require a field that contains 10 characters, whereas another banking system may require the same field, but it can hold up to 14 characters. So it's just those kind of configuration requirements we need to understand as part of that implementation project. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And because we have such great consultants in-house as well that understand the process end to end, it is something we guide our customers through, from the start of the implementation all the way through to, going live with the product itself. There are a lot of touch points for our consultants to go in, gather requirements as to, not only how do you want your payments module to look like, but also, the actual pane file itself and what are we sending to the banks. So that's something that our consultants are highly adept at bringing out from our customers, the specific requirements there.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that is it for the questions that we have. Shiv, are you able to see the poll results?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did have 2 poll questions. I'll run through both of them. So the first one was approximately how many manual payments does your organization make each year? So the options were 0 to 5,000, for which we received 75%. So 75% of our audience have 0 to 5,000 manual payments a year. 20,000 plus was 25%, so that's quite a large volume of manual payments to be made each year, particularly where you have manual processes in place. So we didn't see any votes for the 5 to 10 or 10 to 20. So it does look like it's kind of 20,000 plus, or 0 to 5,000 is the kind of general volume of manual payments being made.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's either kind of a very small amount, or actually we're looking at quite considerable volumes each year.
Exactly. And if we see the correlation between manual payments made each year and how they make the manual payments, around 60% of our audience actually make manual payments using Excel templates and email. So if we kind of do the calculations between 20,000 manual payments being made through Excel templates and email, that's a lot of potential risk for things to go wrong, potentially human error where you're inputting data, but also the volume as well. Where do you store that information? The Excel templates, the emails, it's a lot of documentation to be stored internally. Whereas, with ICO itself, everything is stored in one place, which is beneficial for end users, but also external auditors as well.
Absolutely.
So going back to the second poll there, so in-house tools or outside of ERP, in terms of how the manual payment process is managed by our audience, that was around 20%, and 20% of our audience had an unknown manual payment process.
That's interesting. So we're still looking at quite a considerable majority there that are still looking at those processes and managing those processes very manually. And we talk about risk, and we have mentioned kind of fraud, but it's something that people don't really like to think about. But I mean, I suppose with Excel templates and emails, it's just that huge element of human error. Both of us know we started our careers as qualified accountants, working with spreadsheets all the time, just, trying to do things at speed. The potential risk of simply transposing figures or typing things incorrectly, and the risk of data manipulation can be quite considerable. And when we're thinking about manual payments being made, I think the idea of utilizing a solution such as ICO can really benefit quite a lot of organizations out there to help make that process kind of so much more secure.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And, with manual payments, fraud is something that should be at the forefront. As you say, error of transposition, error of omission, those things can be by accident, but then also it can be by purpose as well. And really, I think that's where ICO comes into its own with its, its audit trails, its checks, its validations, its highly configurable nature really does put in that kind of backstop against any potential fraud or errors.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think that takes us to the end of our webinar for today on secure manual payments. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Shiv for attending as well, to keep me company throughout this presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for joining today's presentation. And just a quick reminder that the ebook is available. There was the link in the chat, so hopefully you've had the opportunity today to click on that link and download as well. So thank you ever so much for attending. This has been recorded and will be available on demand if you have colleagues within your organization who weren't able to join today. And I wish you a great rest of the day.
Thank you all. And thank you, Sarah, for having me.
Thank you.